We open up our shiur, essentially continuing the topic that we featured at the end of our previous shiur, the topic of motzi shem ra. On the side of the Gemara, under the nosei, the topic heading, we have noted Makoros, sources, lomar, to explain that the ve'onshu in the pasuk in Devarim, Perek Chav Beis, will be noting psukim Yud Ches and Yud Tes, and in those psukim you find the words ve'onshu, and you'll see ve'yisru. We have to establish that ve'onshu was a reference to the 100 pieces of silver that the husband who had cast aspersions regarding the fidelity of his wife will have to pay when it is revealed that he was lying. V'yisru, also a word appearing in the pasuk, equals malchus. That refers to the punishment of lashes that are administered to him. Of course, these are points that we discussed in our previous shiur. Here we're focusing on the issue of sources. Our recommendation is that you should be familiar with the psukim in Dvarim Perek Chav Beis. We'll cite right now two psukim Yud Ches and Yud Tes. We're referring to the husband who merely cast aspersions as opposed to telling the truth. He cast aspersions, and it was revealed that what he said was untrue. The pasuk says, "V'lokhu ziknei ho'ir hahi es ho'ish v'yisru oso," and the elders of that city will take the man, that's the husband, v'yisru oso. There's the word v'yisru that we're gonna show that has to do with malchus, administer lashing. V'onshu, pasuk Yutes says, v'onshu oso mea kesef v'nosnu lavi hanaro ki hotzi shemra al besulas Yisrael, and he will be punished with the financial obligation of paying 100 pieces of silver to the father of the girl, concerning whom he cast a bad name. And the pasuk goes on to say, "V'lo ti'alisha lo yuchal lishalcho kol yomav," and he, the motzi shem ra, actually has to marry her without the option of ever divorcing her. And now we say has to marry her. That means what he has to. She would have to be. She remains married to him, because after all, we are talking about a man who had married the woman. His claim was that she had behaved immorally with illicit intimacy, which was revealed to be a falsehood. Now the Gemara text. We are 8 lines from the top of Daf Mem Vov. Tanu Rabbanan, v'onshu oso, ze momoi. That's a reference to the payment he has to make. V'yisru ze malkos. That is a reference to the lashing. So bishlama v'onshu ze momon. The explanation of the word v'onshu, that will be punished, that's a reference to the money payment. Dichtiv. It says quite explicitly, v'onshu oso mea kesef v'nosnu lavi hanaro. He is fined with the payment of 100 pieces of silver that are to be given to the father of the girl. Ela v'yisru ze malchus minor. How do you know that the word v'yisru is a reference to lashing? Amar b'volo madnu, and here we have a string of words that in effect create a we'll say like a type of gzera shav, a word connection that enables us to make that conclusion. And Rashi quotes the relevant psukim. We will suffice it with just reading the connecting words. Yisru mi Yisru, v'Yisru mi ben, uben mi ben, in which you see a pasuk that says v'haya im bin hakos harasha. So you have the word ben associated with the word hakos, and in one of the other psukim you have the connection between v'Yisru and the word ben, enabling us to conclude that v'Yisru is a reference to makos, lashings. Azhora lemotzi shemra minolan. Before one can administer lashings, there has to be a provision in the Torah that indicates that you're dealing with a negative command. So what is the negative command in the Torah that is the source for the lashings that will be administered in the case of Motzi Shemra. So Azhor Motzi Shemra Min, where is there a negative command in the Torah regarding this? So we have two opinions. Rebbe Ozer Omer Milo Selech Rachil, from the prohibition of being a tail bearer, and Rabbi Yonasan Omer Mi Unishmarta Mikol Davar Ra. And that's another pasuk that one shall keep himself, guard himself from any davar ra, motzi shem ra. This has to do with this negative speech, the aspersions that he casts upon her. The Rashi points out that when you have the word nishmarta and or the root of the word shomar, that indicates a negative command, so that could serve as the basis in the Torah that this is a type of offense that could receive lashings. And as we go on in the Gemara, you can see we've squiggled underlined the names and the question of why is it that each one of these opinions did not say like the other. Rebbe Ozer, my time alo omar mehai. Why did Rebbe Ozer not say from unishmarta mikol davar ra? The Gemara answers, Hahu, the pasuk unishmarta mikol davar ra miboy alech Reb Pinchas ben Yoyer. That is, that Rebbe Ozer needs that pasuk for a different teaching, a teaching of Rav Pinchas. Unishmarta mikol davar ra mikan omer Pinchas ben Yoyer. Based on this, the Tana, Reb Pinchas ben Yoyer, teaches Al Yahar Odom B'Yoyim V'Yovo Lidei Tuma Balayla. A person should not have thoughts of an immodest nature during the day, because if he does, that could cause him to have a defiling experience at night. This has to do with the male release of male seed because of improper, immodest, immoral thoughts during the day. So that we should also point out that the Rashi says right next to this pasuk, it says this week pasuk nishmarta kol davar ra was pasuk Yud, and pasuk Yud Aleph it says kiyeh b'chayish asher lo yeh tohar mikra laila, which is a reference to the male seed release that's associated with defilement. And in order to avoid that, one has to maintain cleanliness of thought during the day. That is what Rebbe Ozer uses the Unishmarta Mikol Davar Ra pasuk for. Rabbi Yonasan, my time alo omar mehai. Why did Rabbi Yonasan not cite Lo Selech Rachil? Answer, Hahu, according to Rabbi Yonasan, the pasuk of Lo Selech Rachil is used for something else. Azhora lebezdin, it's a warning to bezdin. Shloye rach lozeh v'koshe lozeh. Have to do with a type of playing favorites, a sense of unbalanced justice. They shouldn't be. Rach is soft with this one and hard with that one. And if you look at the word Rachil, you can see that it's an abbreviation or an allusion to this idea of Rach, the Rachil, Reish Chof, Rach, Li, Rach unto me. And hence, Rabbi Yonasan didn't use Lo Selech Rachil as an azhora for the Motzi Shemra, because it, in his opinion, is an azhora for proper judicial conduct. On the side, we have a Nosei topic heading, which reads as follows: Parshas Motzi Shemra, Lo Nemar b'mikra shel edim shebo me'aleim lohoyed al aznus. The Parsha of Motzi Shemra, the section of the Torah deals with casting aspersions regarding a woman's fidelity, is not a reference to a case where witnesses come on their own to testify about a woman's misbehavior. Machlokes Tanoim, Isagi she'abal omar li edim lo idlo, o boy namish yiskor oisa bekesef. We'll see a Machlokes Tanoim with regard to the husband that casts aspersions about his wife's behavior. Is it, and of course we're talking about it turning out that he was a liar. Is it enough that the husband simply brings in witnesses to testify to his side of things, or is it necessary that in addition to his bringing in the witnesses, he would have had to hire them for pay, and only then would the parsha of Motzi Shem Ra apply, which of course involves the payment of the 100 pieces of silver and the lashing. The Gemara. Lo Omar Li'edim. If a husband did not say to the witnesses that claim she was immoral, Bo Vahiduni, come and testify for me. Vehain Mi'idin Oisoi Me'alein. And they come on their own. And it turns out that it's all a lie. Hu Eino Loke Ve'eno Noisein Me'oslam. He does not suffer lashings, nor does he pay the 100 pieces of silver. Within the bracketed section that you see here, you have a language that needs upgrading. After the brackets, it says, Ohi oy zoimemeha magdimen lebeis haskila. If it turns out that the witness's testimony is accepted, and the result of that would be then you have a nara hamurasa that was misbehaving in immoral terms, so she will be subject to stoning. And if it turns out that she is innocent, and that would be because the witnesses that were brought forward turned out to be charlatans, it turned out that they couldn't have testified about her behavior because they were somewhere else at that time, those are called Eidim Zoimimim. So what did they try to do to her? They tried to implicate her in the violation of a capital offense, resulting in her being stoned. And instead of her being stoned, when they're shown to be liars, they get the punishment they try to impose upon her. Now, let's go over the bracketed section. He vizomemel magdimin lebeis haskila. Within the brackets, it says that the woman and the phony witnesses will be sent to stoning. So to that, the Gemara reacts, He v'zomemel salka daitoch. She and the phony witnesses, how could that be? As if she is being sent to the Beis Haskila, then the witnesses must have been honest. And if the witnesses are charlatans, if they're liars, then she wouldn't be punished. Ella he zomamel magdin Beis Haskila. It's either she is sent to stoning if, of course, the witness's testimony remains, or if the witness's testimony is undone through Hazoma, then they will receive what they tried to see that she should have received. In other words, they get what they tried to do to her, and they will be stoned. We continue in the Gemara. The Gemara infers from what we saw at the beginning of this source regarding the husband and his lack of contact with the witnesses. Taima delo omar luhu. The reason that the husband is not punished is because he didn't say anything to the witnesses. They came on their own. And of course, once again, we're talking about witnesses that we eventually expose them as liars. So the husband doesn't get punished because he didn't say anything to them. Ho omar luhu. Afagav delo agrinhu. However, had he invited them to testify, had he requested for them to testify on his behalf that the wife was immoral, even if he didn't hire them, then the husband would have to, upon the revelation of the lie, the husband would then have to suffer the lashing and pay the money, even without having actually hired them, but rather by merely in requesting of them to testify. Lafuke mid Rabbi Yehuda. This is to the exclusion of the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Desanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer Eino Chayav Ad She Yiskor Edem. Rabbi Yehuda says that the husband's guilt, when exposed as a liar, will be only if he hired for pay the witnesses to testify about her misbehavior. My time of Rabbi Yehuda. What's the source of Rabbi Yehuda's opinion? Omar Rabbi Avo, Asya, Sima, Sima. There's a Gezerah Shava using the word Som. Ksiv Hacha, V'Som Lo Alilois Dvorim. Here in the context of the Motzi Shemra, it says that he placed upon her false words. In other words, he lied about her. But the word V'Som we dashed underline. Ksiv Hasam, and elsewhere in the context of the prohibition of ribis, the prohibition of taking interest on loans, it says Lo Sasimun Alav Neshech, and we dashed on the word Tasimun. The root of that word also is Som. Ma Lahalon Momon, just like over there when you're dealing with matters of interest that has to do with money. Afkan Momon, so too when the pasuk describes the husband and his falsehood, it has to do with his having hired for pay the witnesses. Omar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak B'chein Tani Rav Yosef Sidoni Bei Rabbi Shimon Ben Yochai Asya Sima Sima. Rav Nachman, and likewise this Rav Yosef from the yeshiva of Shimon Bar Yochai teaches that this is the basis of the Sima Sima Gezerah Shava. Boy Rabbi Yirmiyah. Now maybe we should point out before we go further in the Gemara, within the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, the idea of guilt arises only when witnesses are hired for pay to lie. And he learns this from the topic of ribis. In the topic of ribis, portables are spelled out. In other words, when you take a loan, when you extend a loan, it might be a loan in terms of cash, it might be in terms of food. Those are portables. You're not supposed to receive in return, in payback, any more than you extended. So that's as far as the source in the Torah regarding ribis. The examples the Torah gives have to do with receiving more portables in return for the loan of portables that you had initially extended. Now that gives rise to Rabbi Yirmiyah's question. Boy, Rabbi Yirmiyah, Sachron bekarkamau. Let us say, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you hired the witnesses for pay in terms of land. In other words, you said to the witnesses that if you testify on my behalf, if you lie on my behalf, I'll give you this piece of land. Does that also constitute a form of payment of the witnesses that will lead to Rabbi Yehuda's point of view that constitutes hiring them, which would result, of course, as we said, in the husbands getting punished? What about b'pachos mishava pruta mahu? Let's say you hired them for pay, but you pay them with a value less than the minimum size coin. That's called less than a shava pruta. If you would just to imagine for a moment that a pruta would buy 2 paper clips, let's say you paid the witness 1 paper clip. Now 1 paper clip, it's a portable, but it's worth less than a pruta. It's less than the minimum amount of money. A third question, Shneihem b'pruta ma. Let's say you hired the 2 witnesses. If without 2 witnesses you don't have a case. You hired the 2 witnesses, the minimum number of witnesses that a court would listen to. So you hired the 2 witnesses and paid the 2 of them together with 1 pruta. How much will each one receive? Less than a pruta, a hatzi pruta. Does that constitute hiring? Boy Ravashi, Hotzi Shemra. Ravashi, in the meantime, Rav Yirmiyah's questions are not answered. They were simply presented by the Gemara. Ravashi asks, Hotzi Shemra, Al Hanisuim Harishonim Mahu. On his first stage of marriage. Let us explain. A man had married a woman, he divorced her, and then he remarried her. At the point that he took her back, he then says, when we first got married, at the point of my initial act of intimacy with you, I discovered that you were not a basula, you weren't a virgin, you had relations with some other man. And then it's revealed that he's lying. Does that result in the punishment referred to before? Al nisue ochiv mahu. Let us say you're dealing with a yavam. The man died leaving a widow. His surviving brother, he's called the yavam. He marries her, and the yavam casts aspersions about the woman's behavior with his deceased brother, namely that when he's the brother-in-law that now marries her says, when my brother married you, he had discovered that you had, after Erusin, you had intimacy with some other man. And it turns out that he's lying. What is the din? Does the yavam have to, does the yavam receive lashes and pay the money? So we have a lot of questions that were raised in the last 3 lines. Pshot mi Yochana, let us resolve one of them. The Toni Rabbi Yonah, as biti nosati lish hazeh. The Parsha describes the father of the girl after hearing the aspersions cast. The father says, he comes forward and says, yes, I gave my daughter over to this man, and the father proves. If you look in the psukim, you can see how that's done. The father demonstrates that he is lying. But in the pasuk, it says that the father says, I gave my daughter to this man. Lozeh is a word of a minimizing or exclusionary word. To this man, velo liyavam. In other words, for our purposes, the whole parsha of Motzi Shemra is limited to the initial husband, not to the yavam. So if the yavam starts casting aspersions about the woman with regard to her relations with his deceased brother, and it turns out that that he's lying, the yavam is not going to be subjected to the punishments that the Torah ordains for the Motzi Shemra offender. On the side of the Gemara, we have a topic heading, which reads, Machloikis Rabbanan v'Reb Elazar ben Yaakov im Parshas Motzi Shemra ne'emar rak im boal o afilu lo boal. A Tanaic controversy between these opinions, and in our previous shiur we made note of the Rabbanan Reb Elazar ben Yaakov, and that's why you have an arrow that indicates Mem Hey Omed Beis, as we demonstrated in our previous shiur. But for our purposes, the machlokis at hand is the husband who marries the woman concerning whom he is going to speak ill. Does the parsha apply only if the husband with his new wife had intimacy with her, or even if he didn't have intimacy with her? Ketzad the Gemara. The Gemara here asks, my Rabbanan umay Reb Elazar ben Yaakov. This is a line and if you look back there on Mem Hey Amud Beis, you'll understand that there the Gemara made reference to the Rabbanan Reb Elazar ben Yaakov, but didn't spell out what they said, didn't cite the source. Hence the Gemara here is asking, what is the reference to the Rabbanan and Reb Elazar ben Yaakov that was made earlier? Desanya. Ketzad Hotzah Shemra. How does the case of Motzi Shemra unfold, or how does it take place? Paul lebezin v'yomar ploni. Man comes to court and says, Lo motzasi lebitcha psulim. He's confronting the father of the girl, and he says, I didn't find that your daughter to be a virgin. We have a bracketed section that we will skip initially. Im yesh edim shezinsa tachtov beskila. If there are witnesses that she had illicit relations, adulterous relations, after she entered the erusin relationship, the marriage, or the initial stage of marriage with her husband, so then she is punished by stoning. zinsa meikora. If there's no sign of virginity, as the husband claims, however, it's demonstrated that she had intimacy prior to their marriage. So we have a fellow that just married a girl, and it turns out that she's not a virgin, but the loss of virginity was as a result of her intimacy prior to their first stage of marriage, prior to their erusin. Yesh la ksuba mona. She's entitled to the financial guarantees accorded to a wife. However, not the 200 that a virgin receives, but she will get 100. And we don't say that since he was duped or he was tricked, that she doesn't get anything. But rather you see from here that, as we've learned in the past, back on Daf Yud Aleph, Konsa b'cheskas b'sul v'nim says b'ula, this Tanaic opinion says she gets 100 is as far as her ksuba. Nimtza shem ra eino shem ra. It turns out that the bad description, the bad words about her aren't true. Hu loikev v'noisei me'asela. He gets lashed, the husband that is, and he pays 100 pieces of silver to the father. Bein bo'al ubein lo bo'al. Whether the husband had intimacy with her, or even if he didn't have intimacy with her. Rabbi Ozer ben Yaakov Omer lo nemru dvorim halalu elo k'sheboal. Rabbi Ozer says that the parsha of Motzi Shemra does not apply unless the husband had intimacy with his new wife. As we go on in the Gemara, we have some extensive marking, and on the side under the Mivneh heading, you see a volcano shape or trapezoid highlighting the word Bishlama. Hapsukim yoisu kalim lavona lefi shitas Rabbi Ozer ben Yaakov. The Gemara will point out that Rabbi Ozer ben Yaakov's approach makes it easier for us to appreciate the psukim, or maybe we should more say that the psukim read more easily if you follow Rabbi Ozer ben Yaakov's approach. And the double underline highlights Elo l'Rabbanan, but according to the Rabbanan who had disagreed with him, Eich HaRabbanan masbir hapsukim. How will the Rabbanan explain those very psukim that seem to support the approach of Rabbi Ozer ben Yaakov? The psukim that the Gemara will be referring to are Dvarim Perek Chof Beis, psukim Yud Gimel and Yud Daled. We've included them on the side of the Gemara, so let's just read them ahead of time to get a feeling, an overview of the psukim that will be cited in the Gemara. So, as we said, on the side of the Gemara, Dvarim Chof Beis Posuk Yud Gimel, Ki yikach ish isha uvo eleha usnea. Man takes a wife, and we've dashed underlined the expression ubo eleha, that seems to indicate that there was intimacy. Usnea, and then he develops an antipathy toward her. V'som lo alilo istvarim, and then he starts to cast aspersions about her. V'hotzi oleh shame ra, and he publicizes evil or bad things about her. V'yomar esu isha zos lo kachti v'ekra v'leh v'lo matzosi lo b'sulim. Here's the woman that I took. Now, we dashed on v'ekra v'leh means literally I draw unto her. It seems to indicate intimacy, and in the course of intimacy, I did not find her to be a virgin. As we said, that sounds like Rabbi Ozer ben Yaakov's approach. Another pasuk will be cited in the course of the Gemara, pasuk Yud Zayin, and you can see we've quoted this on the side as well. And it reads, V'nei hu som alilo istvorim leimor lo motzosil bitcha b'sulim v'ele b'sulei biti uforsu hasimlo lifnei ziknei ha'ir. The father in this pasuk is responding to the charges leveled by the husband and says, you are casting false aspersions concerning my daughter, and the father then spreads out the simla garment, the sheet, the fabric that reveals on it the blood characteristic of a first intimate contact with a virgin, indicating that she was a virgin. Now the Gemara, the first trapezoid shape, Bishlama, the Rebbe Elazar ben Yaakov, according to his approach that said that the parsha, the section dealing with Motzi Shemra, and all of its details apply only if the husband had intimate contact with his new wife. Hainu dichtiv. With that we understand the words Ubo Elah that we saw in Pasuk Yud Gimel, Vo'ekrav Elah that we saw in Pasuk Yud Dalid. And the Rabbanon, according to the Rabbanon, that the parsha applies even without physical intimacy. My Ubo Elah Ve'ekrav Elah. What do those words indicate? Answer: Ubo Elah Be'alilois. A man came upon his wife with claims. Vo'ekrav Elah, and I drew unto her bidvorim, with words. So it has to do with the husband's speech and not actual physical contact. Bishlama lo Reb Elazar ben Yaakov, hainu dichtiv. I understand well, according to Reb Elazar ben Yaakov, the pasuk in which it says, Lo motzasi lebitcha psulim. I did not find your daughter to be a virgin. Elo l'rabbanon. Now, before we read that, what does it mean? It works out well according to him, because the husband had to have had intimacy, according to Reb Elazar ben Yaakov, with his new wife, and in the course of that physical act of male intimacy with his wife, so he felt that she was not a virgin. So the pasuk that says, I didn't find her to be a virgin, makes perfect sense. But Elo l'Rabbanon, according to the Rabbanon, though, that there isn't any necessity of having had physical intimacy with her before he speaks up. My lo motzasi lebitcha psulim. What does that mean? I didn't find her to be a virgin. Before we go further, let's just think about this. Here you have a man that married a wife, and he's now claiming that he is claiming that she's not a virgin, and he's saying that even without having physical contact with her. How could he say that? So it must be that he has witnesses that are telling us that she is not a virgin. Witnesses that are saying that she had illicit intimacy before this moment. So according to the Rabbanon, when the husband says, Lo motzasi lebitcha psulim, what does that mean? Lo motzasi lebitcha kishrei besulim. I have not found witnesses that undo the testimony of the witnesses that I have brought in. The husband brought in witnesses that back up the claim, that testify that she behaved immorally. And the husband is saying, listen, I've got these witnesses, and I didn't find any witnesses that would undo, that would be mazim, that would show, that would demonstrate that my witnesses could not have testified concerning what they've said. So the Rabbanan explain also, Lo motzos lebitcha psulim, according to their approach. Bishlama le Reb Elazar ben Yaakov, hainu dichtiv. According to Reb Elazar ben Yaakov, that speaks about the husband having actually had intimacy, the pasuk Yud Zayin that says what it does makes sense. It says v'ela besulei biti. The father produces the we'll call it the sheet or the garment that was present when this couple had their initial act of intimacy. According to Rabbanan, that the whole parsha can very well take place without the husband having had any actual physical intimacy with the wife. What is meant when it says that the father produces the virginity of his daughter? It says V'eila b'sulei biti. These are the signs of my daughter's virginity. The Gemara explains V'eila kishrei b'sulei biti. The father is bringing in witnesses that are mazim, that undo the testimony of the witnesses brought in by the husband. By having a second set of witnesses come in and challenge the first witnesses by saying, how could you have testified concerning her behavior on that particular time when you were with us in a different place? By the Eidim being mazim the first set, that it reinstates the girl's fidelity, the kashrus, the acceptability of that girl, of that wife. We look at the Rashi, Kishrei b'sulei biti Eidim hamazimin es Eidov. The father produces witnesses that undo the testimony of the husband's witnesses. And so that's what's meant by V'eila b'sulei biti, according to the Rabbanan. Bishlam ola Rav Ozer ben Yaakov hainu dichtiv. According to Rav Ozer ben Yaakov, the pasuk said, pasuk Yizayin uforsu hasimla, and they spread out the sheet. So that is understandable, that there was an actual act of intimacy as Rav Ozer ben Yaakov requires in order for this parsha to take place. And it says they spread out the sheet that the couple had been on during their actual initial contact, initial intimacy. According to the Rabbanan, that you can very well be dealing with a situation where there was no actual intimacy. What does it mean they spread out the sheet? Omer Rabbi Avo, Pirshu ma shesom la. There was an explanation or a re-explanation of what the husband had initially claimed regarding her. Kedesanya, uparsu hasimla, melamed sheboyin edim shelzeh v'edim shelzeh, uborim es hadover kesimla chadasha. The expression uparsu hasimla means that the witnesses of this one and the witnesses of that one, you have the husband's witnesses and you have the fathers of the girl who brings in his witnesses, and they they thrash it out between themselves and they clarify the situation, they clarify the details like a new dress. Just like a new dress is clean and clarified, it's something that's described as borur. That hence the pasuk uforsu simla is an analogy. When we speak about the simla chadash is an analogy to something that's very clear. Reb Elazar ben Yaakov omer dvarim kiksavam simla mamish. Reb Elazar ben Yaakov, of course, is consistent with what he has said up till this point, that we're talking about the actual sheet, not any a drosha approach to the word, but rather literal. Sholach Reb Yitzchok bar Rav Yaakov bar Giri Mishmei Rav Yochanan. And maybe we should just note the structure before we continue any further. On the side there's a nosei mivneh heading. There's a house shape, and Roman numerals 1 and 2. These are Shnei Lishonos Rabbi Yochanan. Im habal yochol lahagi dvar vafilu im boal shelo kedarka. There are two versions of Rabbi Yochanan regarding the possibility of the husband testifying. Let us assume for the time being that we're working within Reb Elazar ben Yaakov's approach to things, that the husband, in order for the parsha of Motzi Shemro to apply, he would have had to have intimacy with her. When we speak about intimacy, there's something called Bia Kedarka and Bia Shalo Kedarka. Bia Kedarka, Darka means the regular way that a man and woman cohabit, have intimacy with one another. And then there's the less common or the unusual form of male insertion or contact, intimacy with the woman. We continue now in the Gemara. The following was said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Afal gav shalom otzinu b'chol haTorah kula shechilek hakasuv bein bia kedaka lebia shalo kedaka lamakas uleonshim. Even though we don't find in the rest of the Torah a distinction made between the regular form of male-female intimacy versus the uncommon form of intimacy. No distinction is made. In other words, the halacha regards both forms of male, we'll say male penetration, when you're dealing with forbidden acts, whether it results in lashing or it results in court execution, whatever the case is, they're treated the same. Avol motzi shemra chilek. Within this topic of motzi shemra, a distinction appears. Eino chayav ad sheyiv oil, even shalo kedarka, v'yotzi shemra only kedarka. We hesitated a few minutes ago in terms of Rabbi Yochanan, according to whom did he say what he said. Here the Gemara shows what our problem was. But before we go on, first, what did Rabbi Yochanan say? He says that there's no chiyuv, there's no violation of the parsha of Motzi Shemra unless the husband had actual intimacy with his wife. How he had the intimacy, that doesn't matter. He had intimacy with her, whether it's kedaka or even shalo kedaka. However, when the husband says that she was with another man, when he's motzi shemra about her, he would have to say that she had a regular form of intimacy with that other man. Kiman, Rabbi Yochanan, he's an Amora. Based on which Tanaic authority does he say what he just said? Ike Rabbanan, if he's saying what he's saying according to the Rabbanan, Afagav the Lo Boal. The Rabbanan already said that the parsha, the details of Motzi Shemra apply even if the husband had no intimate contact with his new wife. HaRav Ozer ben Yaakov, and if Rabbi Yochanan says what he does according to Rav Ozer ben Yaakov, we're turning now to the top of Omid Beis. Idi ve'idi kedarka bo'inan. Since Rabbi Ozer ben Yaakov was viewing the psukim kind of on a literal basis, then the simple reading of the psukim would have indicated that the husband's own initial intimacy with the new wife would have had to been kedarka, not shalo kedarka as well. And Rashi explains why that is. After all, the husband is saying lo matzasi lo beslum. How can he say I didn't find her to be a virgin if he had penetrated her in from the posterior, which is the shalo kedarka fashion? The only way for him to say I didn't find her to be a virgin is if he had a kedarka initial act of intimacy. So as far as Rabbi Ozer ben Yaakov is concerned, who takes the psukim at face value on their literal level, Rabbi Yochanan couldn't have said what he did. Ela sholach Rav Kana mishmei de Rabbi Yochanan. That is a second version of Rabbi Yochanan. Eino chayav ad sheyivoil kedarka v'yotzi shemra bekedarka. Here you see that, and you can see why we've dashed on line Kedarka, that Rabbi Yochanan is saying what he did within the opinion of Rabbi Ozer ben Yankiv, and says that the parsha of Motzi Shemra will not apply unless the husband's initial contact was only in the Kedarka fashion, and what he says about her illicit behavior was that she had a Kedarka form of intimacy with some other man beforehand. As we continue, we have a new Mishnah. Notice we've highlighted with a diamond the words Av and Habal, and we'll be exposed here to Zechuyosehem. We're looking at our note on the side, Zechuyosehem, the Chiyuvam, Bebito, Beishto, we'll say the benefits and the obligations that are relevant when you're describing a father-daughter relationship and a husband-wife relationship. Ho'av zakai bebito bekidusheha. A father has the rights concerning his daughter, a minor or a na'ara between ages of 12 and 12 and a half. That's the na'ara. The ketana is under age 12. The father has the rights to give his daughter over in marriage. Bekesef b'shtar b'biyah, through the three different methods of marital called acquisition, whereby we establish the marital legal relationship either through money, where a man presents money to the woman, in this case the father of the girl, or through a marriage document, a shtar, or biyah, which would be a situation where the father gives his daughter over to a man for intimacy, and through that first act of intimacy that establishes kiddushin, the first stage of marriage. So that a father has rights over his daughter's establishing a marital relationship on behalf of his daughter. Zakai b'metzias ma'asiyadeh. The father also has rights to any lost articles that his daughter finds. The article is then given over. We'll just assume, of course, we're talking about something that has no identification marks, a lost item that the finder is allowed to keep. In this case, she's the finder, but it's the father that's going to keep it. Uvamais yadeh, any income she produces, v'aforas nedoreh, the rights to absolve her vows. Umekabel is gita, as long as she is still a minor. If the husband decides to divorce her from the stage of erusin, if she had not consummated her marriage and she's being divorced prior to the chuppah, prior to the marriage canopy, the nisuin stage, the divorce document would be given to the father. If we're talking about a girl that has not reached bagus, she's under 12 and a half. So the father receives the get on her behalf, and she's thereby divorced through the father's receiving of it. V'einoi oichel peros b'chayeha. The father, however, has no rights to the usufruct. That means properties that the girl may have inherited from a maternal grandfather. Those properties that the daughter inherited from, once again, her maternal grandfather, her own father has no rights to consume the fruits. Procedurally, the fruits would be sold, and some item of longevity would be some item that has a non-perishable, whose value would be maintained, would be purchased in exchange and kept for the girl until she becomes an adult. Nises, once the girl enters nisuin, yeser olav habal, the husband has rights above that of the father. Sha'ochel peros b'chayeha. The husband is entitled to benefit from properties whose principal is owned by the wife. The produce, though, of those properties, the husband is entitled to benefit from. V'chayav, the husband is obligated. He's obligated to sustain her food-wise, and if she's taken into captivity, the husband is obligated to redeem her from captivity, and he is obligated in the event that she dies during his lifetime, the husband has to see to it that she is buried. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, afilu oni sheb'Yisrael, even if you're dealing with a man of poverty, lo yivchos mishnei chalilin u'mekeinenes, regarding the funeral that he has to provide for his wife, there shall be no less than 2 flute players. These accompany the eulogies, and mekonenes, this is a person, a woman that knew how to arouse the emotions during the burial. Mekonenes is associated with a dirge sayer. Bekesef minolan. Here the Gemara wants to know the source for that which was taught in the Mishnah, that the father is entitled to the kesef kiddushin, to the money that a husband gives in exchange for the marriage of in this case, of the girl. The topic heading on the side reflects this. We've written Kesef Minolan, Chipus, a search achar hamoker de'av mekabel kesef hakidushin shel bito haktana v'anara. Source that the father is the one to receive the marriage money of his daughter, if she's a minor or even if she is a nara. Nara, technically speaking, she's an adult because she's over age 12, but she hasn't reached age 12 and a half. So the Gemara asks, Bekesef min olam, from where do we know this regarding the marriage money, that it goes to the father? Omar Rav Yehuda, Omar Kra. He cites a pasuk, V'yotzo chinam ein kasef. This pasuk refers to the departure from a situation of Jewish servitude, and it says that the servant leaves the master without any money. Just to refine our explanation, we're talking specifically, we mentioned a servant, we're talking about a girl that had been sold by her father into servitude, and the pasuk describes, without getting into the details of the background of the pasuk, it describes her leaving the master without any payment. In other words, she leaves for free. The master from whom she is departing does not get any money. And we now infer, Ein kesef lo don zeh. This master, the man who had purchased her, he doesn't get money upon her departure. V'yesh kesef lo don acher. There is money that a different kind of master receives. Monu aviyah. Who's that different kind of master? That's a reference to her father. That when she leaves her father's domain, in the case of marriage, that master, i.e. her father, gets money. So this would be the source for the father receiving money, we'll say, in contrast to an owner of a Jewish maid who does not get money upon her departure from servitude. The father, a different kind of master, does get money upon her departure from his domain through marriage. So father gets marriage money. You can see we have a double underline, and on the side, this highlights the word v'ema under the mivneh heading. Haluas hatzois chilufios. We're going to raise alternative suggestions. We'll also see some numbering here in the Gemara. The numbers 1 and 2 represent shlavim, stages limtso mokur, to actually find a source, shekesev kiddushay na'ara heim lovia. How do we know that the money paid to a father for the marriage of his na'ara age daughter? Na'ara is a girl who, as we said earlier, technically speaking, she's an adult. She's over 12 years of age, between 12 and 12 and a half, but even so that the money given for her marriage goes to her father. So now we turn to the Gemara. V'ema l'dida. Why not say that the money goes to the girl? We just said that when she leaves servitude, so there's no money paid. But when she leaves her father, money is paid. Maybe it's paid to her. Gemara responds, Hashto vio mekabel kiddusha. If we just skip the bracketed section for a moment, Ihi shakla kaspa. The reason we skip just to make the reading a little bit easier. I'm going to read that again with the skip. Hashto avio mekabel kiddusha. Ihi shakla kaspa. Once we know, and in the brackets we see the source for that, the pasuk dichtiv in the brackets is written as biti nosati lish hazeh. This is a pasuk actually from the Motzi Shemra Parsha, but we see here that the father declares, I gave my daughter over to this man. So we see that the father, he is the one that gives his daughter over in marriage. So is it reasonable to think that here the father is giving her over, she's going to get the money? Why? It's the father. If the father is giving her over in marriage, it stands to reason that in exchange for his daughter, he gets the money. The Gemara continues, V'emo hani miliktana, the less law yad. Okay, the father gets the money, but maybe that's only in the case of the marriage of his minor daughter, where she doesn't have her own control. Yad literally means her arm. She doesn't have her own arm. It means she doesn't have her own control. She doesn't have the ability to receive marriage money. She's a minor. She doesn't have sufficient mental capacity for that. That's the idea of les lo yad. She doesn't have control over herself. Aval naro di islo yad. However, if the girl is over 12 years of age and someone presents money to her, presents a marriage proposal to her, she is able to make that decision. She is able to receive, or as we said, she has control in the sense that she can receive kesef kiddushin, and her marriage would be considered a marriage. Maybe ihi tikdash nafsha v'i tishkol kaspa, that she marries herself off and she keeps the money. And what we are out to demonstrate, that's not so. But that a father is the one that receives the money. Even in the case of a na'ara. Where do we know that from? And here, as we said in our introduction, this is stage 1. Omar Kro, binurel beisovia. Kol shvach niurim loviha. All profit that a na'ara produces goes to her father. The Gemara is going to raise a difficulty with this. You can see we have a long question marking. If you just skip for a moment to number 2 after the question is raised, and it's a very strong question demonstrating that binureh beisavia cannot be used as a source for father receiving marriage money of the na'ara. The Gemara later will say at number 2, skipping for a moment, elo mistabra, it's likely, it's logical, d'chimimayet rachmona, when we saw the pasuk v'yotza chinom ein kosef, the Gemara made a drosha, a scriptural revelation based on limitation, based on exclusion. We said that only in this case there is no money. namely, in the case of departure from servitude, no money, but in the case of departure from daughterhood, from father's domain, there is money. So that when you are making the, we'll call it that type of limud, the miut, so the Gemara says, Yitzia de kavasa ka memayet. And Rashi explains that, which in Mirza Hashem will look into that when we get there. In the meantime, we think we have a moker, binurel beisavia, kol shvach nurim lovia, and now the Gemara challenges that as a source. We begin our long question. V'ela, ha di omer Rav Huna Marav. Rav Huna asks a question, Minayin shemaise habas lavia. From where do you know that a girl's income goes to her father? Shenemar, v'chiyim kor ish es bito la'oma. Where the pasuk translated means when a man sells his daughter off into servitude, ma amo maise yadeh l'rabo, just like a Jewish bondmaid, her income goes to her master. Af bas maise yodel lavio. So to a daughter's income goes to her master, namely her father. So Rav Huna Omar Rav says that this pasuk of V'chi Yimkor is the source for daughter's income going to father. Lomali, why does Rav Huna have to cite V'chi Yimkor? Tepuk lei mibunarel beisovia. Why not cite that pasuk, which we thought meant that all income goes to father? Elo, I'll tell you why Rav Huna Omar Rav doesn't use Benur Beisavia as a source for daughter's income going to father. Elohahu b'haforas nidorim hu dichtiv. The pasuk is found and is limited to the context of absolution of vows. That a father absolves his daughter's vows. V'chitemo, you might say, okay, that's the context of the pasuk, but neilif mina. Let us learn from father's power over vow absolution to father's ability to receive her income. No, Rav Huna Amar Rav wasn't going to do that. Momono meisur lo yalfinon. Matters of financial concern, i.e. daughter's income, from matters that deal with the realm of isura, we call it the religious or ritual realm of Judaism, represents a different topic, lo yalfinon. So I'm not going to be able to derive matters of finance, i.e. daughter's income going to father, from the fact that daughter vows are controlled by father, and namely rights of absolving them. So at this point, you can see that Binureh Beisavia cannot be the source that has to do with girls' income going to father. And as a result of that, girls or na'aros marriage money going to father. So how am I going to know that na'aros marriage money goes to father? And that is what the Gemara says after the bracketed section. And at which point the Gemara will tell you, Elo mistabra, it's a function of a svora that we'll elaborate on when we get to it. But now, within the bracketed section, continuing with it within Rav Huna Marav, he sought as a source v'chiyim kor ishes bito la'oma. That's the source that a girl's income goes to father. Within the brackets, v'chitema neilif miknasa. You might say, why not learn that kesef kiddushin, the marriage money. We mistakenly or inaccurately just made reference a moment before to girls' income, but repeat the more accurate explanation. The issue of marriage money. At this point, just let me clarify, before the bracketed section, we've demonstrated that Binurel Beis Avio cannot be the source. What might be the source? Maybe V'chi Tema. If you suggest Neilif Miknasa, we know that a father gets the knas money if a girl, a daughter of an individual, is raped, or if she's seduced. The father, as is dictated by the Torah, the father receives the money. So why not learn from that? Let that be the precedent that marriage money goes to the father. The Gemara says, once again, we're dealing with different realms. We don't learn mamon, matters of finance or monetary matters, from knas, though knas also deals with money, but it's a fine. We don't learn. It's cross-realm learning, and we don't do that. One realm cannot serve as a precedent for the other. So even though in knas we see that a father receives the fine money, fixed amounts that are established by the Torah due to certain types of offenses, that is a different realm from which we cannot learn to the realm of momon. You might say, all right, I can't learn from the fine aspect, but we know that when, let us say, a rape takes place, in addition to the knas, and we've discussed this in previous shiurim, there's also mamon payments. There's financial market loss value that takes place as a result of a girl being exposed to a rape, being the victim of a rape. Then that is not knas, that's mamon. Boshes is the money paid for the humiliation, and the pagam, the money paid for her depreciation. And in those cases, the father gets those payments. So why not learn from Boshes Upagam to the realm of marriage money, that the father gets it? The Gemara says, Shiny Boshes Upagam, those are, again, they're different. The Avionami Shayach Bey. The father has control over matters of Boshes and Pagam, as is witnessed by the fact that a father could give his daughter over to marriage to a person, to a man that is absolutely disgusting, a menuval or a mukeshchin, a person afflicted with body boils. And that is an experience that's embarrassing and results in depreciation. And a father has control over that. Therefore, the fact that the father has control over Boshes and Pagam does not show me that a father is entitled to receive marriage money. And more specifically, marriage money of a daughter who is a Nara. So how do we know that a man's Na'ara age daughter who gets married in exchange for money, that money goes to the father? Elo mistabra dechi memayet rachmana. When we learn the pasuk in the exclusionary, in the minimizing or contrast form that we mentioned earlier, Yetzia de kavosa ka memayet. Here we look at Rashi, third line under the Gemara text. Yetzia de kavosa ka memayet, ma kesef de yetzias adoin. Remember we spoke about the girl leaving Jewish servitude. The money spoken about there, actually the lack thereof, upon her departure from that master, have hasam kesef. If there was money paid, and we should point out that a girl leaves servitude when she reaches age 12 or produces signs of puberty. If she were to leave, let us say, prematurely, she would be, let's say, redeemed from that servitude money would be paid in exchange for the time that she still owes the man that bought her for service, for serving as a bondmaid. Rashi tells us that in the case of the girl departing from servitude, if there was payment of money made, the adain shehiyotze mimenu boi meheve kepidyon giroina, the money would have been paid to the master from whom she's leaving in the case of her redemption through girona. What does that mean? De megaras imoi v'yoitza. One calculates the initial purchase price and would subtract from that the number of years that she has worked. In other words, each year of work is calculated, assigned a value, and that amount would be subtracted from the original purchase price. And v'hamoiser noisenes lo, the balance, whatever remains, that would be paid to him in order for her to leave that amount of time earlier. So we see that in the case of her leaving the master, in the case of the Jewish bondmaid, he would receive that money. Af ki ka'omar nami yesh kesef b'yetzi acheres. Likewise, when we said that there is money that is paid in a different kind of departure, it would be paid to that master, namely her father. So just to go over this point, we made reference before to a girl who leaves her servitude at the conclusion of the service period, so that master does not receive any money. He paid for her to work up till a certain point, namely up till age 12, and when age 12 comes, she walks out and he doesn't get any compensation. Another master, we said, would get compensation. But that first master, the fellow who bought her, if she were to leave early, he would get compensated. So, likewise, the other kind of master, namely the father, who was referred to in the drasha we mentioned earlier, he is the one to receive the money, the marriage money. The way Rashi continues, "V'amris l'dido have," if you were to say that in the case of marriage, the marriage money would be paid to her, lo komimayir yitzia de kavasa, you're losing then the parallelism in the departures from the respective masters. So we go back to the Gemara. There still remains a flaw, a seeming flaw that is, in the comparison and contrast between departure from master versus departure from father. Hossam Gabi Adoin, when a girl leaves servitude, when she leaves her master, Nafka Law Mirushusei Lagamri. There's a complete break, a complete severance in from his domain, from his control. Yitzio Da'av, when we speak about the girl entering first stage of marriage, where the money would be paid in exchange for her marriage, she's leaving her father's domain, but it's not a complete break. There's still a lacking in her being given over to the final stage of the marriage, namely the marriage canopy. So that's still that aspect of her departure, or we'll say that her departure from father at the point of the kiddushin, of the erusin, at that point there's still a lack of total break. It's not like the case of the girl leaving her master, that when she leaves at age 12, total break. Case of girl entering erusin and her supposed departure from father, but it's not a total break yet, because there's still another stage in order to complete the marriage, and that's the Masir L'Chuppah, the giving her over to enter the marriage canopy. The Gemara responds and says there is an element of total break. Mehaforas nedorem miha nafka lo mirshusei. At the point of Erusin, there's a major break with regard to absolution of vows. Prior to the Erusin, the father had full control over her vows. Now, at the point of Erusin, the father no longer has that full control. Desnan, the Mishnah says, Na'ara hamurasa, a Na'ara who enters Erusin, Avia ubayla mefirin law nidoreha. The father, along with the new husband, are charged or have the power to absolve her vows. So with regard to departure from father, whereas before the Erusin the father had complete control over her vows, now the father does not have that control. The way I like to put it is that prior to the Erusin, the father acted as a father, sole power over absolution of vows. Now, when she enters Erusin, that's no longer the father's identity with regard to absolution of vows. So there's, with regard to that, total break. It's true the father is still in the picture, but not as a sole absolver of vows, but now as a partner. So there's a complete change in that identity. So in that sense, the departure from servitude is similar to the departure from father's domain. So that as we just look over this Amud of Gemara that was discussing, how do you know that Kesef Kiddushin offered to a girl goes to her father? So as far as a Ketana is concerned, that the Gemara wrapped up pretty early in the discussion. But not only Ketana, but even the Kesef Kiddushin of a Na'ara goes to the father. And that we saw was because of the Yitzia de Kavosa Limait. The Mishnah mentioned that the father has control over the daughter's entrance into marriage. We discussed the father receiving the money if it's a marriage established through Kesef, Shtar Upia, regarding marriage established through a document or through her being given over to a man for intimacy with the understanding that this is their this is the form of acquisition for marriage. Minolon, from where do we know that the father has this right? Omar Kra v'hoisa leish acher. And in this pasuk, which describes the idea of a woman marrying a man, iskish havayas lahadadi. Havayas, the word v'hoisa, is the verb form of to be. So that however she is to be unto a man, unto a husband, all the different forms are compared to one another. So just like we saw in the case of Kesef, it's the father has control over that. So too, regarding Kiddushay Shtar and Bia, it's in the father's control. Zakai b'mitziasa. We said the father is entitled to receive articles that his daughter finds. Why does the daughter, if she finds, let's say she finds some money strewn in a public thoroughfare, she picks up the money and gives that to her father. Of course, money strewn in a public thoroughfare is not something that is expected to be returned to the owner. There are no identification marks. It's impossible to establish who actually lost the money. So, as they say, finders keepers, but in this case, the finder isn't really the keeper. The girl finds the money, she gives it to her father. So at the top of Mem Zayin Amud Aleph, the Gemara explains why. Mishum Eva. Because of a feeling of an ill feeling, a feeling of strife. What do you mean by that? So Rashi at the top, Mishum Eva, the Kevon, the Eino Chayav b'mezunaseha. We will discover later that a father is not obligated to support his daughter. Might sound surprising to some ears, but that will be discussed later on in this parak. So we'll just take this as a given for right now, since he's not obligated by letter of the law to support her. Of course, any decent father will support his daughter, will feed his daughter, but he's doing so as, we'll say, an act of righteousness, an act of charity, but not as the fulfillment of something obligated by letter of the law. So since by letter of the law the father is not obligated to feed his daughter, if you're going to say that the items that the girl finds she keeps, it will cause a sense of strain, of antagonism. Here, I'm supporting her, and what she gets, she doesn't give to me. And the result will be the Lo Zayin law sue, and he won't support her anymore. This little piece of Gemara, in my, if I may editorialize, which I often do, I generally do not do, but this is an example of the Gemara being, we'll call extremely realistic. The Gemara speaks to us on our own level. This is, as opposed to many fine scholarly works in Judaism that attempt to preach to a person on a higher level, to encourage a person to reach loftier levels of existence above the mundane desire for money and wealth and what have you. The Gemara is well aware and talks to people on their basic, called almost their animalistic level of existence. And here is a very poignant example of that. A father and his daughter. How could one imagine a father not wanting to support his daughter and not being very forgiving? Isn't that just what one would simply expect? So here we're telling you that it's very nice that a father supports his daughter, but it's not something he is obligated by letter of the law to do. And once a person is doing something out of the goodness of his heart, as an act of righteousness, if he doesn't get something in return, it will be hard to expect him to continue doing thusly. And in order to avoid that, the Rabbanan, they take a preemptive measure and say, in order to preserve the feeling of duality, of conviviality between people, even between father and daughter, you know what? Things that she finds are to be given to the father. And in exchange for that, he'll continue supporting her, something that he doesn't actually have to do by letter of the law. The Mishnah had mentioned that the father also is entitled to her income. B'maisi odeha minolan. From where do we know that? The Omar Rav Huna Omar Rav Minayin shemaisa habas la'af. From where do we know that income generated by the daughter goes to her father? Shneimar. The pasuk says, "V'chiyim kor ish es bito lama." When a father sells his daughter into servitude, ma amo maisi adeh l'rabo, just like the bondmaid any profit she produces goes to her master. Af bas, like so to a daughter, maise yodeha le'aviha. Her income goes to her father. The emo hanimili ktana, the motzi masvinla. You might say that idea of maise yodeha, of a bas, of a daughter, goes to the father. You might have thought that's limited to a minor under age 12. At that point, the father has the ability, the Torah right, to sell her into servitude. That's the motzi masvinla. He's able to sell her. Aval naro de lo motzi masvinla. But a girl over 12 years of age, between 12 and 12 and a half, the father can no longer sell her into servitude. Maise yodeha didohavu. I might think that the income of a na'ara is something she is entitled to keep. As you can see, there's a triangle that appears on the side under the Mivneh heading, Shlovim, stages, Limso Moker Shemais Yadel Shelbito Naro Shayalchim Lavia. From where do we know that the income produced by a Nara age daughter also goes to the father? So the Gemara says, Mistabra de Avia Havu. It's logical, it's likely that it goes to the father. If one were to think that her income doesn't go to the father, the fact that the Torah entitles a father to give his daughter over to chuppah. Chuppah is the consummation of the marriage procedure. Well, hechi motzi mosar law. How would the father be able to give her over to chuppah? Ha kamevatel law mimaisi odea. On the day that she's getting married, that she's consummating the marriage, she's completing the marriage. She is not going to be working. She's not going to be producing her income. But how can the father be able to stop her from receiving money that she would be entitled to? So if you say that the money that she makes goes to the father anyway, so he is giving her over to chuppah, thereby depriving himself of that which he would otherwise have received. That's quite understandable. But if you say that the Maisir Yadeh of the Nara would go to the girl, what right does the father have then to give her over to the chuppah and cause her a loss? The Gemara says if that's what your logic is based on, we can get around that. I can tell you that the girl's income is something she would keep. As far as the father having reshus, having the power to give her over l'chuppah, porech ravachoy emo diyohiv law schar pakasa. They simply say that the father would give her the whatever loss in income that she would experience that day. He would compensate her for that. Inami, another possibility is the Mosar Labalela. He gives her over to the chuppah at night. That's a time she wouldn't have been working anyway. He's not causing her a loss, but the money that she makes, she would keep. Inami, the Mosar Law b'Shabbosos v'Yomim Tovim. Or he gives her over to chuppah on Shabbos or Yom Tov. Now, even though, let's just work with the assumption, a basic initial stage of marriage, that doesn't take place on Shabbos, but the idea of giving her over to chuppah, which is the consummation of the marriage, that he could do on Shabbos or Yom Tov, or days that she wouldn't be working anyway. So that you can say, on the one hand, the girl keeps the money, and on the other hand, that doesn't interfere with the father's right to give her over to chuppah. So you can't use father's right of giving her over to chuppah to show that he's the one that would be keeping her money. Ella, rather, kitana lo tzricha kra. As far as a minor girl's income going to the father, you don't need a pasuk for that. We cited a pasuk earlier, v'chim kor ishes bito la'oma, and we made a comparison between the oma income going to her master, the bas income therefore would go to her master, i.e. her father. You don't need the pasuk to cover the case of a ketana. Why? The Torah entitles a father to sell her over into servitude to some master. The father has that power. It's obvious then that income that she produces, he could keep. You might say that he can sell her into servitude, thereby causing her income to clearly go to her new master. So certainly up till that point, the father was going to be the one receiving the income. So once we know that the father has the power to sell his daughter into servitude, that is enough information for us to know that the father would be the one to keep the income of his minor daughter, that kind of daughter, that age daughter that he could sell her if he should so desire. So the pasuk that we cited before isn't needed for the income of a minor daughter going to the father. Elokitster kra, when you need a pasuk, I need the pasuk for linara, that even the income produced by the nara, a girl that the father no longer has the right to sell because she's more than 12 years of age, the pasuk indicates though that the income that the nara produces goes to the father. Behaforas nidorel, a father has a right to absolve the daughter's vows. Minolan, from where do we know that? Tichtiv benurel beisovia. And this pasuk we saw earlier, and at that point we already mentioned that this pasuk was in the context of vows, that a father has the right to absolve. Beisovia means in her father's house, the vows she takes, he can absolve. Umekabel iskita, the father is given the ability to receive the divorce document when his daughter is being divorced. Minolan, from where do we know that the father is the one that has that power? Tichtiv v'yotza v'hoisa. V'yotza means departure from marriage. V'hoisa means entrance into marriage. And these two words are found in the context of course a complete pasuk, but for our purposes, the fact that these two words are near one another, iskush yitzia lavaya, we compare departure to entrance into marriage. And before we saw earlier that the father has control over her entrance into marriage. So by the same token, the father has control over her departure. And again, we're talking about girls as long as they either have not reached nisuin yet, we're talking about divorce from the erusin stage, and of course girls that are not bogros, not over 12 and a half years of age. With that, we conclude our shiur for today.